Welcome, Carm Capriato, the Service Aftermarket's podcast pioneer with the gold standard of aftermarket business podcasts. Join me for Aftermarket Insights as we advance the aftermarket. And as always, know that you'll learn just one thing. Find us on your favorite podcast listening app and remarkableresults.biz or on my YouTube channel. Hey, everybody. Carm Capriato, Remarkable Results Radio. Good to have you here. It is still summer of 2024 while I'm recording this, and I do know that everyone in the north of our country is really experiencing some really good heat waves. And I know for sure one very important thing, that everyone in the south, Florida, Texas, all those southern towns and states are still going to have heat. So I've got an episode for you on air conditioning. Yes, I do. Hey, before we get to my guest, Mike Hall, don't forget about BreaksForBreast.com, a great October event for your shop and your community to help raise funds for the triple-negative breast cancer vaccine research going on at the Cleveland Clinic. BreaksForBreast.com. See a real important episode that we recently did to show you all the how-tos. I want to welcome my friend Mike Hall to the podcast. Hello, Mike.
Hey, Carm. How are you?
I'm great. Now, let me set the stage. Independent shop owner group, IPASS here in Western New York, the Independent Professional Auto Service Group in Western New York. We meet once a month, visit shops, go to a restaurant, 6:15 in the morning. Yes, can you believe it? And Mike is one of our members, and he is from the Professional Technicians Equipment Service and Support Company. I mean, this guy's an equipment guru. So at the last meeting, Mike says, "Hey guys, can I have a minute?" And he got up. And he just kind of amazed all the shop owners that were there. And he was talking about air conditioning, some do's and some don'ts and things to watch for. So not only does he sell equipment, does he not only service equipment, he also trains on all that equipment. When do you have time to spend time with your wife, Mike?
4:50 in the morning until 5:15, and sometimes on Sundays.
Good
And I got
for
4
you.
grandkids, well, 3, 1 on the way, and
Wow.
it's crazy, but
Good for you. You're a full service equipment company that offers an array of services to repair professionals. That's his kind of moniker. And 6 mobile repair vans, stocked warehouse. Amazing.
yeah, it's a niche market. It's something that we fell into 15, 16 years ago, and it's really taken off well. There aren't a lot of people who do what we do, and we enjoy it. I got a great bunch of guys. My wife is the president of the company, runs it, does a fantastic job at that. So
I love it. A female-owned company. That is just, I love that. That is an excellent thing. And so I'm sitting in the audience listening to Mike, and I said, geez, I never had Mike on the show yet. But it was so informative that I said, wow, kind of a break from what we normally do here on the podcast. Let's bring in a guy of Mike's caliber and talk about air conditioning. So the stage is yours. We've got, if you're listening on audio, great. You'll hear and learn some things. But if you get over to our YouTube channel, Carm Capriato YouTube channel, you'll be able to see the pictures that Mike references. Mike, the stage is yours. How does an air conditioning machine work, by the way?
That's one of the mysteries that most people who use them don't really understand what the machine does and how it works. And when I do training, one of the first things I do with a training session is pull the covers off a machine and show the technicians all the little parts and explain what they do. Because again, they don't really have an idea. They know it pulls refrigerant out and they think it pushes it in, but it doesn't. They don't understand the whole concept. So, we go through it quite thoroughly, explain to them how liquid refrigerant and oil get pulled out. They have to turn into a gas, get compressed, filtered, and put into an internal tank. The machine has to go through some other processes to make sure that the refrigerant's clean. And when it goes to charge, you have to create a vacuum because the vacuum you create in the vehicle actually pulls the refrigerant in. That's one of the big misconceptions that technicians have. They think the machine pushes refrigerant in. So if they have a vehicle that doesn't charge properly, they automatically think the machine didn't push it in. It probably needs a compressor. The compressor in the machine has nothing to do with the process of putting refrigerant back in, or very little to do with it. We thoroughly go through explaining when the product that comes out of the car is filtered because they have the misconception that everything that comes out of the vehicle is getting filtered before it hits the machine, and that's not the case whatsoever.
Mike, I love the whole idea and the concept of open heart surgery, which is what you're doing when you take the sides off the machine.
Yeah.
And you explain. I mean, how many technicians out there say, Mike, I didn't know that?
Most, if
No.
not all.
And I think it is a fabulous thing that you're doing. You're just not going in, doing what you have to do and leaving. You're saying, hey, let me leave some really cool information with our people.
It also helps them understand when things don't work, gives them a direction so they can say, machine problem, vehicle problem, how do I sort the two out from each other? Is it possible that the machine's keeping this thing from doing this? Is there something wrong with the car that could be creating a problem? And by having that better understanding, honestly, it cuts down on the phone calls. I won't call them nuisance phone calls, but I got one this morning. I hooked my AC machine up to a car and there's something wrong with my machine because it's smoking. Well, tell me a little bit about what you're doing. Oh, we just put a condenser in the car and we're trying to vacuum it down. And it sounds funny and there isn't much vacuum and it's blowing this oily smoke out the back of it. Okay. It has nothing to do with the machine. It has to do with the fact that you missed an O-ring or a seal isn't sealed right, and you're pulling a tremendous amount of air through the vacuum pump of the machine and vaporizing some oil and blowing it out in the exhaust. It's a simple concept, but people automatically assume when they see that smoke and smell, it smells like refrigerant. They see it and they immediately say, it's got to be something wrong with my machine. There's a simple test for it. You close the service couplers, the two couplers that are attached to the vehicle. And if the noise goes away and the smoke goes away, you got a leak in the vehicle.
This is brilliant stuff. And if you're listening, you're a shop owner, thank you very much. But also please be sure that your people in the shop, all the great technicians that work in our industry, get a chance to hear Mike's perspective. 134a, 1234yf. Everybody, have you seen enough machines, 1234yf being sold?
Oh, yeah. Since 2013 is when they kind of hit the market, and it's steadily risen now. This year, we probably installed more 1234yf machines than 134as. One of the things that we do for all the companies that we rep for is we do setup and training. They see how much more important it is with 1234yf that machines get properly set up and properly trained because of the differences in operation. You get two machines that look identical to each other, and one's a 134A and one's a 1234yf, and they automatically assume you push that same button and you're going to get the same results. And that's not what happens. 1234yf, because of the fact that it's flammable, mildly flammable, when the regulating bodies that allowed it to be used in vehicles came up with an agreement, it was that the machine had to go through some extra steps that a 134A machine doesn't. For instance, every bit of refrigerant that gets pulled out of the vehicle or pulled out of a can, a virgin tank to be put in the machine, has to be identified and has to be pure 1234yf, or the machine won't allow it to be pulled in, period. So when you have a contaminated vehicle or a contaminated can, you're not going to pull it into your machine. You wouldn't want to pull it into your machine, but you're not going to.
You're not going to. The machine's not going to stop that, is it?
Oh, yeah. The machine absolutely refuses to take that refrigerant in.
That's what I thought.
The boiling point of the two refrigerants is different enough that if you commingle them, you're never going to get good results if you have a mixed product in the vehicle. One of the big problems.
Mike, why does this happen? Why would somebody even want to think of trying?
On the internet, everything you hear is true, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So somebody posted a while ago that 134A works great in 1234yf vehicles, and it doesn't. Again, the boiling point of the refrigerant is different. The point that it turns from a liquid to a gas is different. Therefore, the pressures that it operates have to be different. The expansion valve that restricts the flow has to be different. It'll work in a certain temperature range and a certain humidity range, but after that, it actually causes damage. You can buy, Joe Blow can go to the parts store and buy a set of manifold gauges, old school way of charging, that have both sets of couplers. So you can use it for either type of vehicle. And unfortunately, somebody decided that they could fill it with the wrong type of refrigerant. That's number one. That's one way the refrigerant gets into a vehicle. The other things is the cans that are sold of 1234yf for the do-it-yourselfer quick fix, they have some sort of propellant in them. Sometimes they use 134a, a little bit of 134a because of the difference in the boiling point. Sometimes they use some propane, different things that'll help propel that and push that small can of refrigerant into a vehicle. That becomes a contaminant. So when you go to recover it with your vehicle or with your unit, guess what? It refuses to take it out because it says 25% 134a and 75% 1234yf.
It's contaminated.
It's contaminated. And most of the time, those cars aren't working properly, and that's why you're hooked up to them anyway.
Yeah.
At that point, the legal thing to do, the right thing to do is to call somebody with a recover only unit, and they come out and hook up and pull that refrigerant out of the vehicle, put it into a tank. I call it the garbage tank. And when that tank is full, you send it to one of the 11 EPA approved facilities around the country that can dispose of it legally.
Do you do recovery?
Yeah, we do. We have recovery units on all our vehicles.
Got it.
Very few shops have purchased recovery units. There's a few of them out there that have, but most shops rely on somebody else to come out and get that refrigerant out.
Is it becoming more prevalent, or is it just stable? The contamination?
Way more prevalent.
It is. Wow. Okay.
Again, the combination of the truth on the internet and the cans have really pushed it forward.
Got it. Makes all kinds of sense. Top service issues that you work on.
Top service issues we work on: stuck in clearing. These machines, because of the smaller AC systems, have to be so small. The amount that the vehicle holds has to be so small that the charge amount has to be extremely precise. And in order for the machine to precisely measure what it's removing and precisely measure what it puts in, it has to clear every bit of refrigerant out of the inside of the machine, the plumbing of the machine, the filter, the compressor. It has to be completely empty before the recovery process starts, or it can't accurately measure what's in there. So stuck in clearing means that the machine wasn't able to pull down deep enough vacuum in all the components to satisfy it and say, yes, I'm completely empty. Things like compressors, which do wear out. Again, the compressor takes quite a beating because you're pulling damaged refrigerant from damaged vehicles out and running it through a compressor, a small piston compressor. There's other things, service issues that can cause it too. Actually, if you want to put up picture 5.
Sure, we can do that. There it is.
So that's a picture of the top of the filter. The filter life on all AC machines is governed by the machine. It tells you when you have to change change the filter. It'll lock out if you don't change the filter. When you get a new filter, most units have a filter that looked like that one did, and it has a small O-ring in the center and a large O-ring around the outside that's supposed to be in that real shallow slot. In fact, if we look at picture 6, you'll see where it's supposed to live. Unfortunately, there's very little to hold that O-ring in place, and there's usually a rubber cap on top of the filter. When you pull the rubber cap off, if you're not careful, the O-ring pulls off with the rubber cap. You put the filter on with no O-ring, and now the machine is trying to pull a vacuum on a system that has a leak. One of the other things that happens is that O-ring gets pushed, the old O-ring gets stuck, much like an oil filter O-ring, up in the manifold where it's attached, and you double O-ring it, and the O-ring, again, can't seal or it splits. So the machine goes into clearing, and usually clearing takes no more than 8 to 10 minutes. But we get the phone calls. You're talking about the service issues. My machine's been clearing for 5 hours, and it still doesn't clear. And the first question I ask is, have you recently changed the filter? Oh, yeah, we just changed the filter. By the time we get there, that compressor's been running for 5 hours with nothing going through it, no refrigerant oil to cool it off. So that filter O-ring that you missed is now a $1,000 compressor replacement. Extremely common.
What a great tip. Wow.
Yeah. So when you change that, be very, very careful. One manufacturer's machine actually now has a picture on the screen when you're changing the filter with an arrow that says, make sure the O-ring is in this slot. I was real impressed the other day when I was servicing one.
Perfect.
It was a huge plus. That's one of the most common things. Again, like I said, the refrigerant itself doesn't pull through the filter first. It pulls through the filter last before it goes to the tank. So any debris that comes out of a vehicle can potentially jam up a solenoid. You've got some machines up to 24 solenoids in them that have to open and close at certain times and be fully open and fully closed for the operation to work, for clearing to happen, for charging to happen, for anything to happen. And those solenoids get dirt and debris stuck on them. Solenoid replacement and compressors are probably our number one and number two overall service issues. Our biggest issue this year has been oxygen sensors on 1234yf units. Oxygen sensors are used by the identifier to tell what exactly that Freon mix is, whether it's pure 1234yf, whether it's got a blend, whether it's got hydrocarbons in it, whatever it might be. The sensors themselves are a small, as it was explained to me by one of the identifier manufacturers, they're a small battery. Depending on what they're breathing, what's around them, their voltage varies. And the voltage, once it drops below a certain threshold, the battery's no good. The sensor comes up as expired, and you get an error message on your machine. It says error 6, O2 sensor expired, and you're dead in the water. It doesn't give you any warning, doesn't tell you, hey, we're getting low. It just says error 6. Actually, if you want to pull up picture 10, got a couple of, those are the two main style oxygen sensors. The right one is the most popular one that's used by most manufacturers. Most AC machine manufacturers buy identifiers from the same two companies, and these are their sensors. The interesting thing is the sensor on the right's $800 and the sensor on the left is $200, and they both have the same functionality and about the same lifespan. And one thing about the lifespan that we've discovered, again, based on our experience over the last number of years, since 2013, is the more that they get used, the more samples they identify, the longer the sensor lasts. Kind of, you'd think it'd be the polar opposite. But again, the gentleman who explained about the battery, gave me the battery analogy, also said, think about a lithium battery. If you let a lithium battery sit for too long and it goes too low, it won't recover. That's how he explained it to me, that, this is a version of a lithium type battery, and if you let it get too low. We've changed 126 of the sensors on the right this year so far.
No.
Which is
okay.
incredible.
So Mike, is it because they're just not doing enough 1234yf jobs?
Most times, yeah. People have bought the machines. I did one yesterday at a small shop in Honey Falls, New York, and he had done 5 services since he bought the machine 3 years ago. So he bought it because he thought he was going to use it a lot, didn't use it much, stuck it in the corner, got it out this year to use it. And after servicing 5 cars, his sensor was failed.
Hey, AAPEX 2024 registration is now open at AAPEXshow.com. Now, AAPEX has an incredible value for the service professional, shop owner, technician, and service advisor. Joe's Garage is your place to hang out with 10 working bays and real live working conditions. You'll find special seminars on Audi, VW, BMW, Mercedes, Tesla, under-the-hood diagnostics, advanced drivability, ADAS calibration, transmission training from ATRA, and more. Business and sales training on mastering organizational skills, time management, leading your team, and driving profits, among others. This year, the training courses are some of the best offered ever, with the industry's best and brightest trainers and coaches. This year's AAPEX 2024 will have more product demos, trending training, marketing and social media support to help you grow your career, sales, and profits. Remember, if you earn your living in the aftermarket, then AAPEX is the expo for you. Continue listening as we bring you the latest from AAPEX 2024, and save the date, November 5th through the 7th. Don't hesitate. Go to AAPEXshow.com. Hey, let's face it. Your shop management system is the single most important tool in your shop, period. NAPA Trax has made selecting the right shop management system easy by offering the industry's best, most comprehensive SMS. Now, it all starts when a local representative meets with you to learn about your business and how you need to run it. After all, it's your shop, so it's your choice, and having local representation is a huge plus. Customizing Trax to your business, whether you're a one-person shop or a large multi-bay or multi-location company, a representative consults with you to help optimize your shop's workflow, efficiency, and profitability. Trax always has the flexibility to do business how you need to do it, which means it can also grow as your business grows. And unlike the other guys, we'll be there for you after installation with the best training and support in the business. Yes, a learning management system tailored to each role in your company. Simply put, Trax was designed and built for shop owners just like you. Visit us on the web at NAPA Trax, that's NAPATRACS.com. Hey, ever wonder how your labor rate compares to your market and state? You now have a site where you can confidentially upload your rate and see other labor rates published in your market. LaborRateTracker.com is an important site to know about. Currently, the database has over 1,000 shops participating and growing every day. But there's more to setting your rates than finding out what others charge. You should look at the labor rates in your state and town to gain a complete picture of the labor rate landscape. Hey, it's easy. Get market intelligence like never before at LaborRateTracker.com. Let's go back a few years when the shop started to buy that unit and spread the word out to their buddies and says, hey, listen, I got this machine. If you're not going to get one, send me the work.
Yeah, and those sensors are the ones that last. The people who use these things all the time.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of companies that do mobile AC service for body shops that don't have a unit.
Sure.
And they very rarely do we ever put a sensor in one of their units because they're getting used all the time. So again,
great piece of advice.
Something we learned. One of the other things, actually, if you want to pull up picture 9, every identifier uses a very small sample hose that runs through a very small filter that's mounted on the identifier. And one of the other failures that we've seen quite a bit on 12334yf units has been oil contamination in that filter and the feed hose that feeds that filter, the very small 1/8-inch plastic feed hose. The reason that some highly contaminated and some don't, there's twofold reason. Number one, you want to start when you do a 12334yf service, or any services for that matter, after you've run the AC system, shut it off and let it sit for about 15 minutes so that the oil that's carried by the refrigerant has a chance to fall back out of the refrigerant and doesn't get pulled into that sample hose. And the best way I've found to train people and help them understand that, I just say, if you sent your kid to get a beer and you heard it roll across the kitchen floor, and you put it on the table in front of you, are you going to open it right away? Only if you want to wear it.
My God, that is just great advice.
Well, it sticks with them. I've gone back to shops and they said, we haven't been opening the beer right away, so we know it's not a plugged up sample hose. That's one of the other things that we've found as a common failure, that oil. The other thing that happens is, for years, people would use a 134a machine, pull a vacuum, and then add oil, disconnect the machine temporarily and add oil to the system, whatever oil they wanted to replenish into the system, into the low side service coupler, and then hook the coupler back up and do their service. The problem is a lot of 12334yf machines, when they charge, all 12334yf machines charge 15% of the charge, and then they prompt you to check the unit for a leak. And about half the machines on the market then recover the refrigerant completely and complete the charge. After you tell it, I call it the Scout's Honor test, that no, I didn't find a leak. It'll recover the refrigerant. When it recovers a refrigerant, all your oil's laying by that low side coupler, and you just start filling your hoses with oil. Then the next time you hook up to a vehicle and it takes its low side sample, you're pushing that oil into the identifier and into the identifier hose. Again, during our training, what we explain to people is, if you're going to add oil, if you change the component, add oil to the component. In other words, if you change a condenser, put 1.5 ounces oil in the condenser directly, attach it. But the oil you want to replenish to the AC system, whatever you want to put back in there, if you want to add 1/2 ounce of oil and a little bit of dye for future reference, there's nothing wrong with that. But do that after the service is complete and the unit's disconnected. Start the vehicle, turn the AC on, slowly push that oil into the low side service port. It automatically gets picked up by the refrigerant and cycled through, and everybody's happy. That's one of the main things that we're seeing. Some of the other things we see quite common, and it's a shame, but if you pull up picture 8, that's a service coupler. That's a 130 or 1234yf low side, but they all look generally the same. And on the bottom is a knob. We'll look at another picture in a minute. But inside that service coupler, if you look down, you see that little pintle sticking up, and around it an O-ring. So those O-rings are what seals the coupler to the vehicle. It has nothing to do with how tight you tighten that knob on the other side. All that knob is doing is pushing the pintle down in the center to push a Schrader valve open. If you have a port that hasn't had a cap on it for a while and it's all rusty, and you slide the coupler on, you're tearing that O-ring. When you tear the O-ring, now you no longer have a good seal. You can get a unit a vehicle that your AC unit says is failing for a vacuum test, and it has nothing to do with the vehicle. It has to do with a torn O-ring on your coupler or worn O-ring. So it's a good rule of thumb to check those O-rings on a regular basis. Flip the coupler over and look at it and see, do you see a chunk out of those O-rings? If you do, you're going to need to replace those O-rings. You're not going to get a good vacuum. It's probably going to fail a vacuum test, and a 1234yf system won't even charge if it fails a vacuum test. So the other thing, if we look at the other coupler picture, which should be number 7, I believe, the knob on the top, service couplers, every time you use them, you're turning that knob in to push that pintle down that we saw in the last slide. When you remove them, you're turning it all the way out to close the Schrader before you disconnect the coupler. When you open and close them, 3/4 of the way in and 3/4 of the way out, they're done functioning. People have a tendency to think that they have to wind that all the way out and all the way in. And when they do, they end up tearing up the threads on the service couplers, and you can't hardly turn them. We've been in shops where it looks like they have to use channel locks to turn them because they're so stiff. There's also packing inside there that will get worn and torn up. So I explain to people when they ask, why do we go through so many service couplers? It's because finger tight, finger loose is all you have to do. Tightening them more doesn't do a darn thing. And yet you'd be surprised how many people get in there and really reef those couplers on and off.
Great advice, Mike. I can't believe these are gold nuggets that are just falling off the tree.
Couple of things that we've noticed in the market recently, which I've got some more pictures of. And we saw it a couple of years ago in some GM products and some Ford products, but this year is Chrysler's turn. Desiccant, the drying agent that's inside of AC systems, it seems that whoever's producing the desiccant bags, which is a bag with holes in it that allows the refrigerant to flow, and the refrigerant flows around the desiccant, and the desiccant sucks the moisture out of the refrigerant. It seems 1234yf is dissolving bags, and once the bag is dissolved, the desiccant pushes throughout the entire AC system. The customer comes in and says, my AC, I turn it on, it gets cold for 2 minutes, and then it gets warm. Technician hooks up the machine or gauges and sees the low pressure sucking down into a vacuum. The high side is coming up to a steady pressure and then staying stagnant. It's not moving around. He says, okay, we got a problem. We got to pull this thing out. And they recover the refrigerant out of the vehicle. And next thing you know, if you pull up picture number 1,
I got it. Go ahead.
You end up with solenoids that are full of desiccant. And picture number 2 probably shows what the desiccant looks like a little bit better. That's desiccant. That's little pieces of desiccant that are all shoved together. They absorb humidity and moisture in the air, so they kind of got hard after a little while, but when they first come out, they're extremely pliable, and they get pulled into the machine. They make a mess of machines. We've done 7 Chrysler machine repairs, and they're big. They're a couple $1,000s plus to take that entire machine apart and clean those pieces of desiccant out of the machine and out of all the components. Most of the solenoids that are in there, you can't take apart and clean. They're not built that way. It's made a real mess. So right now, I'm just waiting, and Chrysler still doesn't have a service bulletin on it, which I'm surprised. They'll probably put something out. It seems to be Jeep Renegades seem to be the ones that are doing it. Every Chrysler dealer had serviced a Renegade 1 or 2 before the catastrophic failures. And the failures that you'll get, and the first thing you get is oil drain error, usually oil drain error 1 or oil drain error 2, which means that accumulator where the refrigerant and oil first came in so that the refrigerant gas could be pulled out the top and compressed and the oil could be drained, it didn't drain. Machines are smart enough to sense whether they're able to drain. That desiccant drops to the bottom of that bowl, and then the pressure in the accumulator tries to shove it through some tiny ports, and it just can't go. It has nowhere to go. So you get the oil drain error. That's a error that most machines, 1234 and 134a, will both give. And it's, usually due to some sort of debris that's getting pulled out of the vehicle. But you definitely don't want to ignore that error, because when you do, that means the liquid that's left, the oil that got pulled out, is starting to get stored in that accumulator instead of drained. The accumulator is designed to have liquid get drained out each service and the gas get pulled out the top. If the accumulator gets too full with liquid, the compressor takes a drink of liquid. It's like driving your car under the viaduct in the rain. It doesn't happen. That takes a compressor out immediately. We've had, numerous units where you take them apart and that accumulator's got a quart of oil in it, which, it shouldn't have more than an ounce of oil in it. It has a quart of oil in it and the compressor's wiped out, and you ask about oil drain error and they go, oh yeah, but I could push the button and go right by it. Don't ignore it. When it's like the check engine light, don't ignore it, because maybe it's not going to hurt anything, but maybe it's going to put you on the side of the road.
Great advice, Mike. I mean, you're seeing everything out there.
Oh yeah, every day. Phones ringing like crazy, and our service calls we're getting them done as fast as we can, but we've never been as busy as we are right now.
Is the summer the busiest for you because of air conditioning?
It is by far. Although summer usually starts in February and ends in November for us, so
Wow.
we don't get much of a lull.
No,
People are using the machines more and more for other services because you have to.
Hey, Mike, you got any do's and don'ts we need to pay attention to?
Definitely do. So number one, extension cords are a no-no. Okay. The voltage drop that you get through extension cords, and oftentimes we find extension cords are actually miswired. The hot and the neutral are backwards. Depending on the extension cord, we actually have testers for it, but it can cause crazy problems with some of these machines because they do have small processors inside of them. They have to be able to analyze inputs and decide on outputs. So extension cords are definitely out. Tank valves, the virgin tank valves that you use to refill the machine with, the virgin tanks themselves, the blue tank on the 134A or the white tank on 1234yf, they have a valve on them, a manual valve, and we try and pound into people's head, keep those closed until the machine calls for refrigerant. The operation that you do is controlled, or is done by the refrigerant that's in your machine, not by the refrigerant that's in that tank. That tank is there to replenish the refrigerant in your machine. So what we found is a couple of things. Number one, I've had a couple of those tanks that the valve actually leaks around the packing. So you get a $500 can of 1234yf and you open the valve and hook the hose up and you fill once, and then you go to fill it again, and that tank's completely empty or close to empty, and you check it with a leak detector and it's leaking around the packing on the tank. If you think about it, those tanks are meant to be disposable. When the valve's closed, the packing has no use. But when the tank is open, if you leave that valve open, you're relying on the packing on a disposable tank to seal that unicorn urine, as most people call it, because it's about as rare as unicorn urine. That's why it's so expensive. So again, keep those valves closed until the machine calls for refrigerant. When the machine says I'm low, I need to refill, if it tries to auto refill, it'll say no tank detected. Then open your valve, let it fill up. Once it fills up, close it. Service covers we talked about. Proper
Wait a minute,
use.
I got to stop you for a minute.
Yeah.
That was one of the most expensive pieces of advice that you could have given.
It happens all the time. So some of the other things, by leaving those valves open, the 1234yf, and again, something we found out since 2013, tends to dry out rubber more than 134a. Yet most unit manufacturers use the exact same solenoid in both units. So the solenoids will start to leak slightly over time. And one of the solenoids that leaks a lot is the identification solenoid for the virgin tank. So when you first try and fill your machine, the first thing it does is identify, and that small solenoid opens up to let a little bit of refrigerant flow through the identifier, and the identifier warms up and says, yep, we're good, we can fill. If that solenoid sticks open and you leave the valve open, your tank will empty right through that solenoid and right through the identifier, and it also shortens the life of the oxygen sensor because you have so much refrigerant flowing by it. That's another big reason to keep the tank valves closed until you need them. Service couplers we talked about, don't over tighten them. Don't over loosen them. Check the O-rings regularly. And if there are no caps on the service ports and they're all rusty and crusty and crappy, clean them before you put your service couplers on there. Clean them, put a little bit of refrigerant oil on them just so they can slide on. We did talk about, too, the oil in the 1234yf sample hoses. That gets there because you don't let the beer sit on the table for 15 minutes before you open it. We touched on injecting oil at the right time, which is after the service is completely done, so that you're not putting a bunch of oil into the unit.
Wow, what a very, I mean, do people just call you and say, give me the latest information? You're just what a resource.
Well, not necessarily, but I've done a lot of training. We do training for body shops, were one of the main ones that it started with, because they were having problems with the machine, and a lot of the machine problems were related to the operator error or not knowing what they were doing and how to operate them properly. And I was shocked, absolutely shocked, at how few people that use these machines on a regular basis, like the guy in the body shop that puts cars back together, had a clue as to what they were doing, how to add oil, what kind of oil to add, where to add the oil. Some of them asked me questions that I just shook my head at.
That's just kind of too bad, but maybe I blame it on the educational side of this, where the machine came in and maybe they weren't properly trained, or maybe there is just a continuous education to remind ourselves what needs to be done.
There really almost has to be. I mean, if you don't stay up on things, and some of the things we talked about today were things that we've seen as patterns over time, and we've actually determined that there's things that can be done to help with them, and those are ongoing. Who knows what next year's service will bring or service issues will be.
Mike, how long you been doing this?
Since 2008, 2007.
That's a long time. What'd you do before that?
So I was a parts and service director for a couple of large dealership groups. I was a technician. I started out in 78 as a technician at an Alfa Romeo Lancia dealer. So ASE Master Tech, I did that for 14 or 15 years, decided it was too hard on the body, went into management, decided that was too hard on the mind.
And so you called your wife to come in and says, listen, do all this mind stuff for me.
No, she was actually in a position where she was looking for something different to do. The gentleman who used to take care of my equipment when I was at the dealerships was getting to a point where he wanted to get out of the business. And it was, what do they call it? Everything just fell into place. So
yeah, he wanted to sell and succeed, and you looked at it as an opportunity. And you're so well admired in our area and have a hell of a business. Six vehicles on the road. How far do you go?
So entire state of New York, other than New York City, halfway down into Pennsylvania.
That's a huge territory.
The thing is, this year, 2 service centers that used to service, there were multiple service centers for air conditioning. 2 of them, one went bankrupt and one stopped servicing completely. So all those calls, all that overflow has come our way this year.
I have a great question about continuity. You learned something. One of your guys in Syracuse learns something. How do you share this knowledge so that everyone stays on the same page?
We do a good job of sharing it with phone calls or with emails. I try and do everything in writing, and then they follow up with questions. So they kind of funnel it to me when they run into something. I get it back to them right away. When we started to see that desiccant contamination in Chrysler units, I wanted to make sure my guys knew, because you could easily go in and replace a solenoid, not really paying attention to what caused that solenoid to fail, and end up with the phone call a day later that the machine doesn't work. And that's the last thing we want to have happen.
So interesting, Mike. We probably have to have you come back and talk about some other stuff that we can all benefit from because of your great knowledge. And, because you do everything from brake lathes to lifts. I mean,
alignment, tire machines. We don't do lifts, so we do tire machines, balancers, flush equipment, floor scrubbers. So it's one of these things where we started out with a few key items, and when we used to go into shops, people were like, man, thanks so much for fixing my air conditioning machine, but do you know anybody that can fix this floor scrubber? Because, I can't get anybody to fix it. Or do you know anybody that can do this?
And Mike says, sure.
Pretty much. As a technician, I had a lot of pride that I could fix anything. If you gave me this information on how it worked, I could figure it out. You know what I mean? It's all plumbing and electrical, and we more or less brought ourselves along with a lot of different things over the years. So we grew substantially. When my wife started the company, she had one employee that I trained, but I still was working in the dealership world and did that for a few years. And we had a second guy and a third guy. And finally I said, come on, you got to give me a job. I mean, so
it's a great backstory. I love it. Mike Hall, Professional Technicians Equipment Service and Support Company out here in the Western. I know you're from Western New York, but you cover the entire state and a big portion of Pennsylvania. Yeah. Thank you for coming on and sharing. Thank you for the pictures. Thanks for having me. Was an enlightening episode. We got to do it again, man.
Sounds good, Carm.
Thanks, Mike.
All right, see you. Bye.